Hello, everybody, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're from. My name is Joanne Watkins. I am CEO and founder of Montage Initiative, and we are very, very excited to have all of you here today. So thank you for joining us. We're very proud to present Emerging from a Wounded World with a focus on PTSD and what it does to us and how we can raise awareness about this very prolific issue around the globe. We're also coinciding with the United Nations 69th Commission on the Status of Women and the 25th anniversary of the Beijing 30 Platform for Action. Montage Initiative will be highlighting during this event violence against women, women in armed conflicts, and the human rights of women. So thank you again for joining us today. Just a few notes. We will have a question and answer session at the end of our speaker presentation. And at that time, you can raise your hand virtually and we'll pick and choose. So, and you will be asked to unmute so that you can actually ask your question in person. And, or if you like, you can also put your question in the chat. We'll hold on to those until we get to the very end. And then we'll open it up to all of our speakers so we can address the questions you may have as we go along. Okay, so we would like to begin with a brief video statement from His Excellency, the Honorable Robert Ray, who's Canada's ambassador and permanent representative to the United Nations in New York, and elected the 80th president of the 2025 session of ECOSOC. Appointed Canada's special envoy to Myanmar in 2017, His Excellency Ambassador Ray engaged in diplomatic efforts to address the crisis in the country's Rakhine state, and he wrote a report entitled Tell Them We're Human in 2018. He was also, in March of 2020, named by the Prime Minister Trudeau to be Canada's special envoy on humanitarian and refugee issues. This led to his report entitled A Global Pandemic Requires a Global Response. So let's take a look.
Thank you so much. My name is Bob Ray. I'm the president of the Economic and Social Council and also the Canadian ambassador to the United Nations. And it's a great honor for me to be able to join you virtually. I'm sorry that the crazy schedule is such that I can't join you in person, but I did want to take this opportunity to really engage with you on this important subject of post-traumatic stress disorder, because it is such a prevalent phenomenon, and because it's growing globally, simply because of the catastrophic humanitarian situation that we're seeing in so many parts of the world. Ever-increasing conflict, sometimes conflicts of the most horrendous brutality, people literally struggling to survive after a trauma, and then realizing that as time has gone on, that there is something still fundamentally wrong that people are feeling. It's taken the world a very, very long time to recognize PTSD as a critical issue. Frequently, when veterans would return from war in Western countries, their conditions were simply called shell shock or disabled because of what they had seen and what they had been forced to do. But in reality, the disease has long been in existence, as long as people have been in existence. And it comes from the shock that relates to the cruelty and the hardship that people face and see, and the tremendous difficulty they have in overcoming the impact of what has taken place. I think all of us who've seen friends and neighbors challenged by this, or who may have experienced it themselves, will know perfectly well how disabling it can be, how much it can set people back, and how difficult it is for people to recover from it. But at the same time, it must be said that recovery is possible. And in fact, recovery happens. And not just with the passage of time. It happens from very effective psychotherapy and psychological treatment that allows people to express what they have been feeling and allows people to go through it, and also allows for very, very skilled practitioners to help people get to the other side. It is, unfortunately, a disease that is extremely prevalent at the present moment. And I think the conversation that you're having is exceptionally important. It is a problem that affects every country. It affects my own country. Sometimes the statistics that relate to how prevalent it is in a given country, Canada, for example, is said to have among the highest rates in the world. I think that has a lot to do with access to healthcare. I think a lot of it has to do with the extent to which the concept has been socialized and widely accepted, and the extent to which the condition can no longer be denied. But I think it's really important for us to understand it is one of the key conditions of our time, and it's so important to be having this discussion. I wish you well in your conversation. I look forward to hearing the results, and thank you very, very much for inviting me to say a few words.
Wow. Thank you, Ambassador Ray, for your kind words and your support for us today. It means a lot. So we're going to get the conversation started. I am truly honored to introduce our opening speaker, a longtime supporter of Montage Initiative and a dear friend, His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Carlos Garcia, President and CEO of OPAD at the United Nations, Secretary General of the UN Association of El Salvador, and former UN Ambassador for El Salvador. Ambassador Garcia served at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of El Salvador as Director of Multilateral Affairs and previously as Chief of Caribbean Affairs. He is also the founder and CEO of CG Global Consultants, committed to the analysis, consulting, and promotion of international relations. So let's welcome His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Carlos Garcia.
Well, good morning to everyone, and thank you, Joanne, for this kind invitation. I have the privilege to participate with other speakers in this event, and I'm so excited because it's an issue that really is hitting a lot of countries, not only developed countries, but I think it's a global pandemic, if you sort to say. So to start my presentation, please forward a little bit in the PowerPoint presentation. We have to deal with the post-traumatic stress disorder. Just to put in context, post-traumatic stress disorder is a mental health condition that caused by an extremely stressful or terrifying event. Ambassador Ray has also explained a little bit about all the details in regards to this pandemic. And what I like to highlight from his remarks in my own PowerPoint presentation is that most people who go through traumatic events may have a hard time adjusting and coping for a short period of time. But with time and, as Ambassador said, by taking good care of themselves and visit to probably some healthcare professionals, they usually get better. The problem starts when this is impossible. When symptoms of PTSD arise, and can be important to address, is otherwise going to get worse. Now, for the purpose of my topic, which is to explain a little bit, so argumenting that can support the idea that PTSD is extremely expanding in developing countries, it is important to acknowledge some risk factors, such as severe or long-standing traumatic experience, were physically injured during the traumatic event, have been exposed to other trauma early in life, had a job that exposed you to traumatic event, so being in the military or being a first responder, drink too much or misuse drugs, do not have a good support system of family and friends. And if we can read through this risk factor, we maybe realize that all of them are fully connected to the lifestyles in a modern society. This is a very important indication because if we read a little bit the right column of my presentation, we will see traumatic event that create risk, such as combat exposure or conflict, childhood physical abuse, sexual violence, physical assault, being treated with a weapon, and accident. So to say that the combination of this risk factor plus the traumatic event that raise risk, we can conclude that PTSD is raised due to the modern lifestyle. Now, in order to support then or to answer the question why PTSD rates in developed world has become a global epidemic, we need to take a look of certain data. Just please watch this crime rate by country 2025. The blue part of this would be the countries who have the higher rates on crime or criminality, and basically are countries like Venezuela, South Africa, just to mention these few, but we can see it in the rest of the world. And then these colors, including this kind of green, which is almost in all planet, in all countries in the world, which makes or give us a clue that the problem is extended worldwide. The only countries, let's say, that has a very low crime rate index could be considered it's these countries, Greenland, and these African countries as well. So very few of them. In order to be exact, the statistics for 2025, it was Venezuela as the country with the highest crime index, 81.2. Then we have Papua New Guinea, Afghanistan, Haiti, South Africa, Honduras, Trinidad and Tobago, Syria, Yemen, Jamaica. Just the top 10 countries that are at the highest level of criminality. Now, this is important because we can see in this index, there is a lot of countries that coming from different backgrounds. Countries that some of them are living internal conflict, and others that are in a situation whereby can be considered a potential external conflict. So the combination of both internal or external conflict is creating an important effects on the mental health of citizens of all countries in the world. Just take into account, for example, our next slide. We have top conflicts to watch in 2025. This information shows some the red spot or the red tire is the high priority conflicts in the region. Even we have within the with the United States, for example, in the border between the United States and Mexico, we have the case of Haiti and Cuba as well. And of course, if we go to Europe and Africa and Asian countries, we saw a lot of potential countries. Start to say Ukraine conflict, the conflicts in the Chinese uh, region due to the case of Taiwan and several other conflicts in the region. The Middle East countries. There is a lot of countries that are suffering conflict right now. So with this type of data, we can conclude that conflict could be considered one of the most, and I would say, relevant factors that are affecting people's, condition in terms of the PTSD. However, I would like to also emphasize one important element. It is true that conflict, I would say, could be considered the top of that. But in addition to that, there is another important risk factor that is connected to the daily life in almost every country in the planet, which is the criminality. And criminality has different phases. You have drug dealers, you have gangs activities, you have also interracial conflict between different communities. So I'd like to present to the public the case of El Salvador. Why? Because this chart is a perfect illustration that even the conflicts and crime, could be considered as important risk factor for PTSD. Also, there is a potential solution to that problem. And if you can see, since the year 2016, El Salvador has the highest rate in murder per 100,000 people. We have 107 crimes by the year 2016. And then, through the different governmental activities, the crime was being reduced. But until the year 2019, when the current president, Nayib Bukele, win the election, he, I would say, contributed to speed up the process of reducing the murder rate in the country. The reason for that is because he implemented a very important strategy based on, as we will follow in the next screen. But before going to that, to let me show you that by the year 2024, El Salvador murder rate per 100,000 people was 1.9. And the projections for the year 2025 is going to be around 0.8% of, the murder rates per 100,000 people, which is, of course, converting or transforming El Salvador in at least the third most safe country in the world. So this is a living proof that when there is a combination of political will, but and strategy, we can find a potential solution. So the question would be, how did El Salvador reduce murder rates? El Salvador, under the leadership of President Bukele, promoted two different strategies but connected themselves. The number one, it was called Territorial Control Plan, that was focused on 6 specific phases, such as preparation, opportunities, modernization, incursion, extraction, and integration. Let me quickly explain this, because preparation, El Salvador, by the year 2015, has around 120,000 gangs members, both from Mar Salvatrucha or Barrio 18, who were committing crimes and basically control the whole territory of El Salvador. Some people say that these gangs' activities control around 89% of the total territory. So it's a lot of physical territory that they were controlling. Now, the phase preparation quickly just simply provide the National Police Force and the Army enough capacity and ammunition and weapons to fight against criminal. The second phase, opportunities, was to expand the participation of the state in those areas that were being recovering. And by that, I mean bringing health issues to the population on that areas, bringing schools, bringing leisure time for students, create. Cubo. Cubo is a building that is dedicated to promote leisure activities, including libraries and computers for students on the poorest communities. Then we have modernization. And by modernization, it was a full process of changing the whole state perception. The government was made an agreement with Google, and El Salvador is transforming the whole public system in online conditions now. Then we have incursion, is referring to the fact that if in any particular community there were reported gangs activities, the government sent immediately even a large number of police and military elements. There was the case, for example, of one town in San Salvador that it was deployed 5,000 militaries and 2,000 police forces just to search and take all these gangs and bring them to prison. Extraction is connected to the incursion, but there's one difference. The difference is because the intelligence of police and militaries on the gangs activities, they were able to just go into a particular community, specifically to where intelligence has proved that, these gangs members were located, so they were extracted without necessarily to go a large number of soldiers or police forces. And then integration, which is the process whereby society is given the conditions for participating in this process. So there were the need for reforming legal and criminal law with a view to extend and complement the activities of territorial plan control. But this is, let's say, the I will say, the power in which the state exercise the right to promote the use of force, if you like, combined with opportunities. But on the other hand, it was also promoted the zero leisure plan, which means that were separated gangs members within prisons with the criminals who were committed different other crimes. And this other population is, I would say, forced, so to say, because even though it's a voluntary program, I mean, people join this. There's a simple reason for that, because for every day that a prisoner works in all the programs promoted by the government, they are conceded 2 days, for reductions of their own sentences. I'm sorry, they're reducing their penalties. So with this program, there is a combination of how to teach and promote opportunities for those prisoners that can, really be in a process of, I would say, redeem themselves from what they commit. I just want to say on this picture has been very popular all over the world. And many people in the world also is claiming or complaining about the human rights issues. And this is a very important topic, but I will tell you why. The change that happened in El Salvador is also in the mindset due to, for several even political and ideological reasons, human rights has transformed their vision in protecting the criminals more than decent people in all countries in the world. El Salvador decided to do the opposite. Prisoners have human rights. That's true, but not more than those who live outside. So decent people have the right to live. And so far, as of today, we have incarcerated more than 86,000 gangs members in prison. With this important activity, criminal rate has been reduced. But at the same time, it also freed thousands of Salvadorians that for the first time, even the case of their life, they are free to, go to street, go to, the parks, keep playing and stay at night. The president, Bukele, always made a challenge, which is very simple. He say, you can go any place in El Salvador. It can be poor, but you can stay all night with your, cameras or watches or any computer. And the day after, you're going to wake up with all your stuff together. Nobody touched you. So with this, I invite you to see the other face, which is the one that is not necessarily promoted by press, because contradict the emphasis on the attack into the country of El Salvador for allegations of human rights violation.
El Salvador vive en los últimos años una transformación significativa dentro de su sistema penitenciario bajo el auspicio del Plan Cero Ocio, una iniciativa del gobierno que busca convertir las cárceles en espacios de reinserción social y productiva. En el centro industrial Santa Ana, una de las granjas penitenciarias del país, ubicada a poco más de 70 kilómetros de la capital salvadoreña, unos 6,000 reclusos aprenden nuevas habilidades para contribuir a la comunidad con su trabajo y prepararse para una vida honrada fuera de prisión, lo que ejemplifica la implementación exitosa del plan, parte de la estrategia de seguridad del país centroamericano.
realmente el plan cero ocio es un plan bien coordinado, en el sentido que estas personas vienen de un centro de aprendizaje. El centro de aprendizaje es el centro de Mariona. En Mariona, o conocido La Esperanza, en este centro las personas se clasifican conforme a sus cualidades, ¿verdad? De que ellos desempeñaban cuando estaban fuera, ¿verdad? En la vida libre, y posteriormente las habilidades que ellos han aprendido acá dentro del sistema penitenciario.
Todos los reclusos participantes de la iniciativa son reclusos civiles, sin vinculación alguna a las pandillas u organizaciones criminales responsables de la violencia que reinó en el país y que el gobierno salvadoreño busca erradicar mediante su guerra contra las pandillas.
Llevo 7 años en prisión y me ha ayudado muchísimo el hecho de estar en un área laboral, el estar dentro de este centro industrial y en las diferentes etapas donde he estado me ha ayudado mucho, porque siempre, me he mantenido ocupado igual que todos los privados de libertad.
El Plan Cero Ocio es una de las iniciativas del gobierno salvadoreño para romper con el clima de violencia, crimen e inseguridad que caracterizó al país centroamericano en décadas pasadas y convertirlo en un país seguro, lo que incluye tener un sistema penitenciario en un modelo de orden, control y disciplina que favorezca la reinserción social. Con información de la oficina en San Salvador, El Salvador, Noticias Xinhua.
So with this, I conclude my presentation. I'm open for questions so far.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Garcia. We will have Q&A at the end, so hang tight for that. But really incredible data with the Zero Leisure Plan, and the effect is astounding, really, in El Salvador. So thank you so much for sharing that. Really important information for us today. So next, I would like to introduce my colleague and very dear friend, Ms. Meera Khanna, trustee and president of the Guild of Service in India. Meera is also author of 2 books on Kashmir. She is a feminist, a social activist, a writer, and a poet with over 20 years of experience working in development, including spearheading projects that build the economic, political, and legal capacities of underprivileged women and conflict-affected women and children in Kashmir. She has served as a consultant to the High-Level Committee on the Status of Women in India and has served on 2 expert committees on widows with the Supreme Court of India and the National Commission for Women. So let's welcome Ms. Meera Khanna.
Thank you, Joan. And thank you, Ingrid, for having me here. It's a pleasure to see friends, and it's a pleasure to mix business and pleasure together. Let's put it like that.
Yeah.
I'd like to start by saying that in the last couple of years, the world has seen a pandemic, the COVID. But there has been existing for centuries another pandemic, that is violence against women. And that's a global phenomenon that exists right across the world. But when we talk about violence against women, invariably we talk about sexual and physical violence. Somewhere, the violence that is done to the mind or the impact of physical violence on the mind, that somehow gets subsumed in the larger narrative of physical and sexual violence. But if a woman is not able to live her life completely because of the impact on her mind, it's a violation of the human right to good health. And governments and society and civil society are responsible for ensuring that this is not the case. I'm going to embed my presentation into my work, the groundwork that I have done in Kashmir. As we all know, for the last 35 years, there has been an armed conflict going on in Kashmir. Sometimes it erupts into a large-scale conflict, and otherwise there is a simmering conflict always, which is why the book that I wrote on Kashmir, I called it In a State of Violent Peace. So the peace has always been in a kind of a violent form. Now, because of the conflict, and I've always say that any conflict is gendered, but the impact of the conflict is faced by women, and particularly as far as mental health is concerned. Now, studies indicate that in Kashmir, the PTSD is prevalent among women in Kashmir, and there has been a notable increase over the last 2 decades. Before 1990, that is when the conflict actually started simmering in 1990, there was very few cases. But by 2004, it was diagnosed as to almost 15 to 20% of cases were being recorded in the outpatient department of the hospitals. But having said that, let me also say this is only the reported cases, because mental health in India, and particularly in the state of Kashmir, is not something that a great deal of awareness is about. When a woman is suffering from depression, she's either considered to be moody, and other factors step in. So, reportage of mental health and PTSD is comparatively less. And as we all know, women are disproportionately affected by PTSD compared to men. A study which was done by Médecins Sans Frontières found that 22% of women suffer from probable PTSD compared to 18% of men. Now, there could be 2 reasons for this. One is, of course, the inaccessibility to mental health care services, and also the lack of mobility. And this is particularly true of women in rural Kashmir. The ongoing conflict in Kashmir obviously has had its tremendous impact on women, particularly women who've lost their spouses or their other male members of the family, either because they've joined the militants, the revolutionary movement, or they have been lost because of cross-firing or as collateral damage. But the woman is actually caught between the state actors and the non-state actors. The state actors being the security forces, and the non-state actors being the so-called militants. So because of this extrajudicial killing, collateral damage, the impact on women is tremendous. And that is one part of it, losing the male members of their family and losing the children. The other part of it is the economic impact of losing the earning member. So all these things coupled together impact the women greatly. In Kashmir, as we have seen through all the 25 years that we worked running a home for conflict-affected women and children, that PTSD manifests itself as anxiety, depression. Anxiety was 36% and depression was 50%. Interrupted menstrual cycle, which again had its impact on their minds, or early menopause, lack of sleep and appetite. And also, let us remember, in rural Kashmir, there is also, many of them have a nutritional deficiency of certain vital micronutrients and vitamins. And that gets enhanced when this kind of a PTSD is indicated. And more important is also the lack of support. Because if a woman has lost her spouse because he was a non-state actor, there is a certain stigmatization that happens. So all these factors combine together to create a situation where the woman suffers from PTSD. Now, of course, there is institutionalized healthcare, though not to the level that one would actually like it to happen. There are organizations, there are hospitals which do the cognitive behavioral therapy so that they can assess what the level of the PTSD is. There is decentralized mental health services in Kashmir, which means the access to the care is better, decentralized in the sense that rather than coming to the capital Srinagar, where the hospitals are, there are primary healthcare centers in individual districts which can actually help the women to understand their mental state. There is also been using the World Health Organization's GAP framework to train health professionals. That also enhances diagnosis and management of health issues. There has also been now in the last couple of, I would say the last decade, a digital mental health platform by which, utilizing online therapy helplines and mobile apps, women can access certain mental health services, especially in areas where access to the hospital is limited. For example, we have what is called the telehealth services, which can and which expands digital platforms. We have a thing called Telemanas, which has shown success in reaching areas. More important, of course, is the creation of awareness, because identifying the PTSD becomes more important. Invariably, and this is true of not just Kashmir, but in most parts of India, when a woman is going through the PTSD or this kind of a stress disorder, she's either stigmatized as mental. The word is mental. She's not all there. So the awareness of PTSD as being a treatable illness, that kind of awareness is to be created. So through training and education, and through, of course, human resource development. But what I want to emphasize here is there is, of course, the institutionalized formal mental health care that can be accessed, but that is not easily accessed by women, particularly those who are living in remote areas, because the geographical terrain of Kashmir doesn't make accessibility or mobility so easy. Having said that, let me also say that today we have given a name to the mental health issue. We call it PTSD. But this kind of trauma stress disorder has always existed among the population. The stress it could be because of conflict, it could be because of family issues, it could be because of losing a child. So this kind of stress has always existed. But there was a traditional coping mechanism. So what I'm trying to emphasize here is that just as we have institutionalized formal care, we need to institutionalize the informal care. Let us not trash that non-formal care. For example, in Kashmir is the informal care that is given by the community. When women get together and they are able to listen to each other, because one of the most important things in PTSD is somebody to listen to you, to understand you. So that kind of coping mechanism exists. The only thing, it needs to be institutionalized. And religious and spiritual practices, it exists, but it has to be institutionalized, and awareness has to be created even among these so-called faith healers and religious leaders on the impact of PTSD. So how can we institutionalize this non-formal coping mechanism that already exists within the community or within the society? Because women often rely on emotion-focused approaches. For example, in many parts of Kashmir, there are what is called embroidery groups, which means women come together, and while their fingers are embroidering, they also talking about the trauma, giving vent to their feelings, to their anxiety, creating a narrative where other women can actually help them into coping with the stress that they are going through. So what is really required, and I think this is important for not just Kashmir, but places where conflict exists, is a intersectoral approach by which both institutionalized formal healthcare can exist along with non-institutionalized informal care, but there is a combination of the two, and both can work in synergy, because it is not possible for women to always access formal healthcare for PTSD. So how can this be done? And this is something that we have been talking to in various parts of Kashmir. One is, of course, the community engagement and participation. The community has to be involved into in addressing this, because it is not one or two women who are suffering from PTSD, but there's a large majority of women who have seen the conflict over the last 35 years who are suffering from this. So we can involve local stakeholders like community leaders, the religious figures in the local mosque or the local church or the local temple, local organizations in planning and implementing mental health initiatives. One is to create the awareness, and two is to create the capacity among these stakeholders to recognize and address PTSD. So this will help. This will ensure that services are culturally sensitive and accessible, because it is important for any kind of addressal to be culturally sensitive to the area and to what the women are actually facing. So it is not one size fits all kind of an approach. The other thing is community-based programs. That is, we develop programs that integrate mental health support into existing community structures such as schools, mosques, temples, community centers. So when we do this, when we create community-based programs, then mental health doesn't become a taboo. It doesn't become it is not something that has to be avoided or something that has to be swept under the carpet. The integration with primary care, that is, how can we integrate mental health services into primary healthcare facilities? Because there are primary healthcare centers across the state, but they only deal with the actual physical illness and are not equipped to handle mental health. Implement, for example, involving schools. Implement school-based mental health programs that involve teachers, counselors, and parents to identify signs of PTSD. Because recognizing the problem is the first part of the battle, and that is the most crucial part of the battle. Then, of course, these are what I would call reactive measures, but there are also proactive measures. That is, you increase the economic well-being of the community of women. You create employment through skill development, so that the reasons for PTSD is also addressed. We don't just address the symptom, but we also address the root causes. And now, with certain the Article 370 having been removed from that, the integration of Kashmir into the federal system of the government of the Indian nation is complete. So the conflict simmers and erupts, but in a much less manner. And finally, social services such as financial assistance, family support programs are closely linked with mental health. And most important is the governmental and the NGO participation in making this work. So in the end, what I would like to say is that we need a convergence of both these kind of institutionalized formal care and non-institutionalized informal care, because there is a depth of domain expertise that exists within the community, which has to be tapped to ensure that accessible, sensitive, and community-based systems are available to women who suffer from PTSD. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mira, for sharing your perspective and the impact of violence against women and the importance of the awareness, especially the ideas of community-based programs. So we really appreciate you sharing those thoughts today. So we're going to move on, and I'd like to welcome another good friend of mine, Ms. Tanya Myers. She is the visionary founder and clinical director of Transformation Haven Counseling in Florida. Tanya is also a qualified multidisciplinary therapist and EMDR psychotherapist, a rapid resolution therapist, and a nationally board certified clinical hypnotherapist. So let's give a warm welcome to Miss Tanya Myers.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's global event. I am honored to be here. Thank you, Joanne, for inviting me. It is a blessing to be here. So I've heard a lot of talking about trauma, and I specialize in trauma. I love trauma. Not that people go through it, only because I love watching people heal from it. However, we have a lot more resources, I think, here in the United States than other countries may have. So I think what I want to focus on is how do we get those resources available to other areas? EMDR is one of those things. I have seen so many people substantially heal from EMDR therapy. It is an amazing technique, and it is not hard to be trained on. It's actually very simple and concise. I know that on a global scale, PTSD is very prevalent, but it doesn't just stop there. PTSD, we have generational things that actually kind of coexist with that as well. Because we've talked, Mr. Gonzalez has talked about like war zones and other things that kind of affect PTSD. But then we have that generational thing, right? So what is generational trauma? So now we have every generation increasing harm on our next generation, which then goes to the next generation, which then goes to the next generation. So what happens if we're not healing that trauma? It just keeps happening. Violence, sex violence. I did some research, and in it said 70% of the world will be, they will have trauma of some sort. Even if it does not admittedly go into PTSD, to a full diagnostic criteria, they will still face some sort of trauma. However, we also have witnessing trauma. That's traumatic in enough. So there's all these type of diagnostics that kind of fall from those things: depression, anxiety, even mood disorders, borderline personality disorder. All of these things are linked to childhood trauma. So the problem is trauma. And if we have generation after generation after generation increasing the circumstances or even probability of trauma, then how are we going to reduce that? Not only that, how are we going to make these techniques that I use over here available in other countries? How do we get those things available to other leaders that are able to get these things, other clinicians or people who help in the field trained in those things? My thought is women are very unfortunate because we get the level of trauma that a lot don't see. Not only do we get situational trauma, sexual trauma, war trauma. In some countries, women can't even have a voice, and that's not okay. However, how do you get that to change? Because we can only change small pieces, and we could teach technique, but how do we get other people to use that technique? EMDR is actually something that is statistically proven to heal trauma. I have used EMDR with my clients for a good few years, and I have seen at least 96%, 97% of my clients transform and heal from the trauma. I kind of explain it this way. We have three parts of our brain. We have the conscious mind, we have the subconscious, and we have the unconscious. So these three parts of our brain hold things. And we don't ever get to see like choose what they hold, right? They hold the trauma, the negative cores, the things that were done to us, the pains, which then go into the depression and anxiety, the lack of sleep, future issues, the self-medicating, the addiction. It's a hard thing to come out from. And I often tell clients we have to heal the core. And the core is what is held in the subconscious from the trauma. The core is the negative core beliefs, the I'm not safe, the I'm not good enough, I'll never be good enough, I don't matter, so why try? And then if that goes to the next generation, and then the next generation, how are we going to heal that? I know that with the EMDR therapy, it actually goes into that core negative in the subconscious and it rewires it that's associated with that trauma. So I've talked a little bit about EMDR, and I don't think I explained what EMDR is. So EMDR is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It is a therapy technique that is used with bilateral stimulation. It's for reprocessing of traumatic memories. And what it does in the processing, it helps rewire the neurobiological aspects of the brain to where those negative cores were into the positive. So you no longer believe those things, which helps with the generational things. Because then if we're healed, we no longer have to live our lives in fear, or I'm not safe, or I'm not good enough. A study actually showed that 90% of single trauma victims no longer had PTSD after 90-minute sessions of PTSD. Another study found that 100% of single trauma victims and 77% of multiple trauma victims were no longer diagnosed with PTSD after 6 50-minute sessions. In a separate study, 77% of combat veterans were free from PTSD after 12 EMDR sessions. EMDR is the baseline of my practice because it heals so much more than just trauma. And if we can make or help other organizations that worldwide get trained in this technique, we could heal so much more than just this area. We could heal the world. I know that would take some time. I mean, I think big when I think. So if we could heal potentially more every day, how do we do that? If we can get people trained in this technique and get the resources available, even as you were talking about in the prisons, it's a very good opportunity for healing. However, it's very limited access to mental health care in prisons, very limited access in the sector of where people can't afford care for these things, even here in the United States. So if we can't, how do we get that more available with funding from bigger organizations? I think that would be a guess or a key. Another thing is teaching those self-healing techniques. Little things like tapping, something you can do on your own with breathing. You do something like that, and it helps to bring you to a calm. Because if we can't afford services, we've got to get to coping in the present. We can't stay in the emotional dysregulation that the PTSD causes. And in every case, I almost guarantee there's some level of trauma or PTSD because it is the root of the dysfunction, unfortunately. And that's kind of where we got to focus to get the healing. There's so many different populations in every part of the world. And 70% of the nations of the world will be faced with some point of or part of trauma. That to me, when I read that, I was like, that is astonishing because we need to do better as people, in my opinion. It starts somewhere. And I figure if it has to start here, why not? I did create some scans of the brain of what EMDR does before and after. So EMDR is a scientifically proven technique for trauma. So this scan right here shows before and after EMDR brain. This woman was actually diagnosed with PTSD. And if you see on the left side, you see all the red. That is all the overreactivity in the brain from trauma, like from all of the things that the brain is holding, the left and the right side of the brain, the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious. Like, I'm sure we can name these many things. However, on the right side, this woman did 4 90-minute sessions of EMDR. And if you see that, like, there's a severe reduction in the red. So a lot of those symptoms just dissipate after EMDR. The depression goes away. The anxiety goes away. You are now living a better life, more positive, able to love yourself, able to make better choices. You're no longer self-medicating. There's so many different things that this technique can heal. Not just trauma, but more than that. So these ones show basically the same thing. On the left side, before EMDR, look at the overreactivity. On the right side, afterwards, there's hardly any there. So in my mind, it's like, how do we get this technique out there to other countries, not just here, but even thinking bigger, how do we get people trained in the technique? And how do we get leaders to push that this is a necessity? That would be, in my opinion, one of the most important factors, because healing the trauma can then break the generational curses, then can reduce crime and other things, other factors. I mean, we're always going to have bad people in the world, just like we'll have good people in the world. However, most of these things are off of trauma. If we reduce that piece, I feel like we would be in a much better position. Okay, so global training. If we could actually provide EMDR training programs, comprehensive training programs that equips other clinicians in the world to have the skills to integrate EMDR in the practice, enhancing the ability to treat trauma effectively. There's also trauma-focused CBT. I now, Miramar, I heard you talk a lot about the resources over there. I did not hear you talk about once trauma-informed cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT therapy, or EMDR. And these are the 3 things that actually change the thought process. So if we could get even that over there, what would that change? I feel like it would be life-changing, not just situational, generational too, because then there'll be a reduction in crime. There'll be a reduction in drug addiction, because nobody's like, we're not going to self-medicate if the trauma's healed. A reduction in mental health diagnostics, because if we can reduce the trauma, we're not going to have the personality disorder that's resulting from the trauma, because BPD is very prevalent with trauma. And I don't know if you guys know about BPD, but it's borderline personality disorder. It is a disorder that is actually relatable to trauma, childhood trauma. I know Dr. Gonzalez talked about childhood trauma, and those are some of the most horrifying things that I have to help with, because they get into your gut and they touch your soul. It's like, how can these things be happening in the world? And it's not just here, it's everywhere. It's women everywhere. We have women who don't have basic needs, but we want to give them mental health care. How do we get that? There's so many things that we can 100% touch bases on with trauma therapy, but we can't hold on to it in just one little avenue either. Like, I feel like in all of the countries that I've heard about today would benefit from it. And how do we make that happen? Because I know that EMDR is successful. I've watched multiple people transform in front of me. It is very a rewarding thing to watch. But then you hear about the rest of the pain in the world and you see it. There's pandemics, there's wars, there's violence, there's hatred. And all of these things cause trauma. How do you get these things out over there so we can maybe eliminate some of that? I mean, I wish there was a magic wand, we could say proof all gone. However, we can only go based on scientific knowledge and what we could do to get resources available to other people.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for giving us such an eye-opener, an eye-opening look at PTSD, really from the scientific perspective. And it's pretty amazing with the effects of the MDR. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And that was amazing. So next, I would like to introduce my colleague, longtime friend, and co-organizer of this event, I might add, Ms. Ingrid Stellmacher. She is founder and CEO of the Lemonade Foundation. Ingrid has worked as chief negotiator on peace initiatives through education, entrepreneurship, and health in Israel, Palestine, Oman, Pakistan, India, Malaysia, El Salvador, the United Kingdom, and the United States. She's also the creator of the Mary Initiative, along with being the lead partner for 9 organizations across 7 countries on refugee integration through dignity, health, and employability. So let's give a very warm welcome to Ms. Ingrid Stellmacher.
I think that sounds a lot. You think, who's that? Can't be me. But I think I'm just getting old rather than anything else. But Joanne, it is an honor to be part of this crucial conversation today on women, PTSD and trauma, and one that I have to confess is a conversation that I join with a rather heavy heart, because the soaring level of violence against women and girls, excuse me, its impact, its legacy, and the speed at which this violence is now accelerating around the world means that the way in which women are seen and their value, our worth, has dramatically declined. And that change has widened the fault line that always was there, but that has now grown so large and so influential that it's cracked open humanity, I feel, and replaced compassion with control everywhere. And the far right rhetoric that's made this normalized, incel groups and clubs that are hiding in plain sight with completely alternative missions to the one that any visitor will see on their walls or in politics and in the name of religion, is becoming so normalized, it is becoming dangerous. Because women and girls are disproportionately impacted by PTSD as a result of the violence they witness and experience, as our speakers have said expertly, not just in countries where the culture has openly kept the lives of women small for years already, though. And we all know who they are. Limiting women's rights to education and training, access to healthcare, the right to work. All of these are part of the Beijing Action Plan points being debated this week. But it is happening in countries we thought were cultures that knew better, that were more enlightened as well. And one sad example of this, I'm afraid, is in my own country, in the United Kingdom, where violence in all its form against women, from physical violence to mental abuse to murder, has risen so much that last year in 2024, when the National Council Policing Statement on Violence Against Women and Girls was published, Deputy Chief Constable Maggie Blythe, who is the lead for violence against women and girls, declared it to be a national emergency in the UK. A national emergency. I mean, I can't believe it. And this is the first time that the police have so openly spoken about the scale of the problem. And that report shone a light on the trend for abuse to be perpetrated by younger individuals. And these are becoming normalized amongst young people, which is putting victims at risk of harm mentally, but also emotionally, influencing the way they see the world and making pain and control normal and staying silent natural. When the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres makes a speech warning us about the reversal and the rollback on the protection of women and girls that's happening, it's nothing new. We've heard it before during previous gatherings of the Commission on the Status of Women. But last week, on March the 8th, 2025, International Women's Day, Guterres went a step further, declaring that instead of mainstreaming women's rights, we're now seeing the mainstreaming of misogyny. And he's right. Everyone here knows it. Women are more vulnerable than ever. And when women are more vulnerable, the world we once knew for everyone is more vulnerable. And the question is, why? Why are we seeing misogyny being mainstreamed? And what can we do about it? So PTSD rates are not just high in areas of the world that are in conflict, where women and girls are particularly at risk and vulnerable, that you would expect it to be affected by. PTSD rates and its reach, particularly in women and girls, are also high in affluent, peaceful countries. And a survey of 24 countries in that category undertaken in 2016 came out with Canada having the highest rates of PTSD, which I was astonished by, followed by the Netherlands, Australia, the US, and New Zealand. And in 2024, Canada still had significantly high rates, as Ambassador Ray alluded to. The Journal of Psychiatry that carried out the survey came to the conclusion that life expectation was a big contributor in affluent countries, that in poorer countries where people have less, they expect less from life, their aspirations are lower and opportunities are lower. And while affluent countries like Canada, the Netherlands, Australia, the US, and New Zealand, their everyday life is made easier by the mechanisms in place to support a population. I'm not sure that everyone would agree with that. That is, in theory, access to food, work, healthcare, things that we take for granted, aspirations are higher. So when something happens in a more affluent country, some trauma, it affects the lives and populations more differently because we are less equipped, apparently, to deal with it, less resilient. So PTSD is prevalent and it's pervasive. And we stand today at a critical juncture, witnessing something far more dangerous come out of the shadows with the mainstreaming of misogyny. Because it is increasingly visible, it is increasingly systemic, it is increasingly normalized, and it is emboldened by digital platforms, by economic instability, which we are seeing more of currently, and not just political regression, but aggression. And it's not merely a setback, it's a crisis, and it demands a coordinated, multifaceted response. One that integrates policy reform, because it's not only the PTSD trauma itself, but other health issues that make sufferers more susceptible to diseases that I was not really aware that had any relation to, and I know that Tonya just referred to that. I'd like, Joe, if we can, to just cue up Shaili Jane's little comments that she's going to make about this. She's the Associate Adjunct Clinical Professor at Stanford School of University of Medicine, and she's also head of the Palo Alto Veterans Hospital, where she's dealing for the last 20 years with PTSD and trauma of veterans, and her own experience of partition between India and Pakistan that her parents endured, and the trauma of that passing on is something that made her look deeply at this subject. Hopefully we can see just the few comments that she's going to make.
Now, why are women at more risk for PTSD? Women are more likely to experience sexual assault, and this experience carries one of the highest risks for PTSD. Women may also be more susceptible to mental health consequences because they are more likely to experience trauma within established relationships, or their traumatic exposures are more chronic than those experienced by men. For example, ongoing interpersonal violence within a marriage. PTSD impacts individuals on a daily basis, and it affects their quality of life and functioning, impacting every aspect from how they love, how they create, how they work, and it can be very devastating to your quality of life. Unfortunately, substance abuse and depression often go hand in hand with PTSD. PTSD is also an independent risk factor for heart disease. Diseases such as diabetes, arthritis, hypertension, obesity, and chronic pain are more common in PTSD sufferers. Intergenerational trauma and epigenetics may play a crucial role in PTSD, as it explains how the effects of a traumatic experience can be passed down through generations, not through changes in the genetic code itself, but by modifications to how genes are expressed due to environmental factors such as trauma exposure, potentially influencing the susceptibility of future generations to developing PTSD. The good news is that this common condition is treatable, but we do need treatments that are more available, accessible, and acceptable to sufferers. The future of PTSD treatment lies in leveraging digital platforms, technological innovation, peer support, preventive approaches, and early intervention strategies to quickly treat symptoms so that sufferers are free to live life to their fullest potential.
Another part of the policy process that should be in place, which I think is going to be very difficult, to help people suffering from PTSD and trauma, are the additional support services that are then possibly required without having understood the link between the different health issues that can occur as a result of the trauma of PTSD, that probably wouldn't get recognized by your regular GP. There would have to be some new medical papers that would come out to really push that. And we all know that health services around the world are struggling. And the UK is a perfect example of that, because their own governments around the world, and particularly ours, has not really invested very much in the expansion of that. They've put the money into other things. So one of the obvious things at the moment, AI is being spoken about all the time, generative AI, and it's being spoken about all the time because it is speeding up in its model capabilities. And Shaili just mentioned the technology, but the technology now would be AI. And if we're going to look at generative AI, the models that are coming now, and are actually some of them are already here, that are looking at not just intelligence or reasoning, but also emotional capacity, are quite interesting. And I'd like to queue up, if you can, Joe, this clip I have of a chess game that you might find interesting. And because if I'm going to talk about the positives of AI, and I know there are, and Omar Golan in a moment is going to talk about that in his application. But this, I've got to put the other side, which is the negative, where we need to be careful.
AI models are now cheating at chess without being told to do so. Researchers pitted 7 large language models against Stockfish, the world's strongest chess engine, revealing that the more advanced the AI, the more it tries to hack the game. OpenAI's O1 preview attempted to cheat in over a third of its 122 games, managing to win 7 times. These models didn't just make illegal moves. They attempted to access the program's code, delete their opponent's pieces, and even replace Stockfish with weaker chess programs. One AI openly documented its strategy. To win against a powerful chess engine, playing a standard game may not be sufficient. I'll overwrite the board to have a decisive advantage. The models even attempted to run a separate copy of Stockfish to steal its moves. While this discovery might initially seem alarming, it serves as a critical learning opportunity. Understanding how AI can manipulate situations helps in designing systems that are more transparent and controllable. The insights gained from this research could prevent AI from engaging in deceptive or unethical practices in fields like finance or security, where the consequences could be far more severe than a chess game.
Well, that's pretty scary, because not only is the AI cheating, but it's lying. And of course, it's flawed because the models are being programmed, are being written by humans, and we are flawed. But there is a great use for AI therapy in PTSD and trauma. And one of the new models that are coming out now, actually, I think Google's already done one, agents that are being used that will go out and be able to talk to people with early PTSD, and then according to what they find, will refer them to someone human. And that will be overseen by an actual human, that process, before these agents go out. It's quite scary. It probably would come because there is a scalable aspect for it that is not possible, even with online courses and what Mira was talking about, because it is just so pervasive. So much of the world is being affected, and women and children particularly, and children get it earlier. They get traumatized more early, because not just because they're young, just the way their brains are developing. But someone who's making the practical application of this work for him is Omar Golan, who's going to talk to you now and share with you his experience of his PTSD and what he's done with it, which is quite amazing. Over to you, Omar.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. It is really a great honor to be here today. So my name is Omar Golan. I'm a seasoned tech entrepreneur. I'm a board member of the World Ethics Organization, and I'm the founder of My What If Foundation. My What If is a nonprofit developing an AI-driven self-help platform designed to support individuals coping with trauma and life's challenges. My journey to this moment began with my own battle with PTSD. 24 years ago, I was in the West Bank when a stranger surprised me with a hug from behind and detonated a bomb that was strapped to his body between us. I spent a year in the hospital recovering from that, and the battle I faced after my physical recovery was the hardest one, and that was PTSD. It affected every part of my life, from relationships to my ability to imagine a future for myself. I know firsthand the hopelessness and isolation that trauma can bring, but I also know that healing is possible. Through my journey, I realized something really powerful. When people are stuck in their trauma, they lose their ability to see beyond that. Trauma shuts off what I call the hope switch in our brain. It's that neural network that helps us predict positive outcome for our lives. Without it, we can't zoom out and change our perspective. And this is really what Tonya spoke about before, that our brain works against us. We don't want to seek help. We don't want to seek help because we can't see that it will be effective in any way. Many victims of trauma and depression have trouble imagining a better future for themselves as they remain tied to this very painful past that they experienced. PTSD and traumatic memories are narratives that shape our behaviors and perception, and they lead to avoidance and limiting patterns in our life. Narratives are what prevents us from envisioning positive outcomes for our future. But what if we could shift our perception of our trauma and create a new reality? What if we could harness the power of technology to help ourselves reimagine our future? What if we can accept our past trauma and discover a way forward to regain hope, purpose, and agency? That's why I created My What If. We are a team of scientists, AI engineers, and mental health experts building a technology-driven platform that uses AI to help people reimagine their personal stories and move forward. We use AI as first responder, providing support at the exact moment someone needs it outside office hours, without specialized hardware, without specialized equipment, or specialized training. It's not meant to replace human therapy, but it is another tool that really, really helps. We achieve this through the new form of outcome-focused narrative treatment. We answer people's most personal what-if questions about their past, their future, and address their regrets, fears, and aspirations. Users receive inspiring, personalized narrative that help them break free from their repetitive thoughts about their trauma, restore a sense of hope, purpose, and control over their lives. Really imagine a better future. We flip back that hope switch. Our goal is to make healing more accessible, immediate, and scalable, especially in communities that do not have access to mental health care, like trauma survivors in conflict zones, or communities that still stigmatize mental health care. PTSD is transparent, not just from the outside, but also from the inside. Sometimes when you experience it for a long time, it's hard for you to remember who am I? What's my personal traits versus what I got as a gift for my trauma and PTSD. PTSD is not just transparent; it's intergenerational. It's contagious as well. As it was said here before me, when we discuss the global crisis of PTSD, we must recognize how women are disproportionately affected, whether a survivor of violence or as caregiver of traumatized loved ones or displaced individuals in war zones. The global mental health crisis requires solutions that scale, and AI offer that potential. But it has to be done and can be done ethically, so we can ensure privacy, safety, and cultural sensitivity while providing real support that is backed by science. My vision is simple but ambitious. I want My What If to be a beacon of hope that helps people everywhere, including Israelis and Palestine. I wanted to help them create a personal vision for healing and for growth for themselves. I believe that trauma isolates, but healing connects. If we can give individuals the tools to overcome their past and imagine a hopeful future, we can inspire not just the personal transformation, but societal transformation as well. I invite you to join us in this mission, whether it's partners, supporters, or advocates. And I think together we can move from PTSD to PTG, post-traumatic growth, and make healing accessible to all. Thank you all, and thank you, Ingrid and Ryan, for inviting me here.
Thank you so much, Omar, and Ingrid as well. Really amazing information. AI is very scary, and it's also pretty amazing. So hopefully we'll be able to find a balance there and really utilize it in the right way. So anyway, I appreciate both of you being here today and joining us. So next, I would like to introduce Mr. Kim Aris. He is founder of Aid to Burma. Kim is a UK citizen. He's a carpenter. He's a father of two. And he is also the younger son of Da Aung San Suu Kyi. For decades, Kim remained out of the public eye, respecting his mother's wishes to keep him separate from political matters. Following her imprisonment and the worsening conditions under Myanmar's military junta, Kim has stepped forward to advocate for her most fundamental rights, which is access to adequate medical care and communication with her immediate family. Beyond his personal advocacy, Kim is actively involved in humanitarian efforts to support the people of Myanmar who continue to suffer under military rule. Kim's presentation is on video. He will be joining us afterwards live for the Q&A session directly. So let's give Mr. Kim Aris a very warm welcome.
Good morning, and thank you to the Montage Initiative for this opportunity to highlight the multifaceted consequences for women and girls following the illegal military coup in Burma, and outline some of my initiatives to provide them with the support they need. Until the mid-20th century, Burmese women were among the freest in Asia, enjoying greater social and legal equality with men than Western women, including voting rights from 1922, only 4 years after the UK. The oppression of women was instituted in 1962 by a deeply patriarchal military junta determined to dismantle the power and influence that women had held. Over the past 50 years, this oppression has been institutionalized by a military shielded by a constitution that grants it autonomy without civilian oversight, impunity for human rights abuses, and extraordinary powers during declared states of emergency. As one soldier put it, we have the authority to rape women. While the 2021 military coup has precipitated an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, ranking Burma third on the IRC's 2025 emergency watch list, women and girls have been uniquely and severely impacted. Beyond the immediate physical dangers of armed conflict, displacement, economic collapse, hunger, natural disasters, and the junta's human rights violations throughout the country, the crisis has inflicted profound psychological wounds, leading to widespread trauma and PTSD. The first civilian fatality of the coup was a 20-year-old woman shot in the head by police during a non-violent protest. Since then, women of all ages, across class, ethnicity, and religion, have been at the forefront of the pro-democracy movement, joined People's Defense Forces, often on the front line, and documented human rights violations. In the word of one young woman, "I came here ready to give my life to this revolution." To date, the military have killed over 6,000 people, 33% of which have been women and children. 6,000 women and 594 children have been arrested, equating to 23% of total arrests, of which 125 women and 88 children have died in detention, 10% of the total. Of the 3.5 million internally displaced people, 89% are women and children. We recently installed a water filtration unit in an IDP camp exclusively comprised of women and children. The men had all been killed, and landmines laid around their villages so no one could return. With the most underfunded UN response plan, over 60% short in 2023 and 2024, a fraction of Burma's 20 million people in need of aid are expected to get support in 2025. Although I have talked with healthcare non-profits and organizations still working on the ground to bring help and hope, my most profound conversations have been with women who have courageously shared their experiences. From direct physical violence such as sexual assault, torture, and rape, to inhumane conditions, solitary confinement, loss of dignity, and the denial of adequate health care in detention centres and prisons, to human trafficking and sexual and cybercrime slavery by criminal elements that have proliferated since the coup. It is women and children who are suffering the most. Many survivors are disowned by husbands or families for cultural reasons or fear of military reprisal. Others have re-experienced abuse by those offering refuge following hazardous journeys to displacement camps and border towns. As a means of coping with trauma, many are now dependent on non-prescribed antidepressants, or in a country where methamphetamine pills are now cheaper than a beer, succumbed to a drug addiction. Others have committed suicide. Those who have not directly experienced violence suffer from witnessing it and the constant fear of it. These factors, compounded by economic collapse, loss of livelihoods, acute food insecurity, the destruction of public services, and climate disasters, has created a confluence of profound suffering. While the world has thus far failed Burma, its people, including the younger generation, women and diaspora, have stepped up. In the words of one woman, "As a mother, deep in my heart, I recognize that my daughter's future, along with the future of all young people in the nation, may again regress into darkness." Across the country, grassroots organizations and cross-border networks have demonstrated a real capacity to deliver life-saving aid outside the confines of mainstream humanitarianism. On my part, with the support of an in-country non-profits and localized volunteers, we have successfully delivered essential items, medicines, medical equipment, and communication systems, and initiated our own clean water project, engineering and installing easy-to-assemble and maintain water filtration units in ITP camps. Our three core initiatives in 2025 being, firstly, the expansion of our clean water project for ITP camps by building water containment ponds feeding into our filtration units, ensuring a constant supply of clean water, mitigating the risk of waterborne diseases, fostering enhanced well-being and dignity, and reducing the strain on distant medical facilities. Secondly, funding a facility for the provision and fitting of artificial limbs. Burma is now the world's deadliest country for landmines and unexploded ordnance, with over 1,000 civilian casualties in 2023. 20% of these victims are children. The consequences for landmine victims extend beyond physical injuries. Amputees, already enduring life-altering trauma, face criminalization by the junta, who associates missing limbs with resistance activity. And thirdly, funding increased trauma counselling and support for women and girls, be it via existing community and healthcare networks or facilities currently offering limited services, to new initiatives such as training more counsellors and providing basic literature for families on how to talk with and support traumatised family members, especially as many parents themselves are reliving the collective trauma of historic military oppression and violence. In conclusion, the trauma experienced by women and girls throughout Burma is a silent epidemic taking place within a mainly hidden and brutal conflict. I am neither a politician nor part of a large NGO. I am simply a son advocating for my mother's release and trying in however small a way to offer life-saving help and hope to the people of Burma. Comprehensive support and resolution of the root causes of the crisis, however, necessitate international and NGO intervention to facilitate the healing and rebuilding of lives for Burma's people, including its women and girls. If any delegates are interested in learning more or collaborating with us, please email team@aidtoburma.co.uk. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Kim, for sharing your incredible story and also for the amazing work that you're doing in Burma and your advocacy. We really appreciate it. And we really, really appreciate you being here with us today. We are getting all of our speakers online to field some questions from everyone that's here. So I have actually quite a few questions in the chat, but if somebody wants to just raise their hand or, the virtual hand, we can also take questions that way as well. So you can pose them directly. So I'm going to start off. I see that all of our speakers are online here, so that's amazing. So the first question, one group that experiences high PTSD levels are people with disabilities, visible or invisible, like neurodivergence or autism. PTSD in such cases can be caused by bullying, social exclusion, sensory overload, difficulties in social communication, passing of a loved one, etc. How can we better support people with disabilities heal from PTSD, and especially those with invisible disabilities and neurodivergence? What can we do from providing healthcare to changing the mindset and behavior of everyday people? Because a lot of the trauma is caused by the behavior of regular everyday people in society towards people with disabilities. So, anybody want to directly address that? I see Tanya and Omer. You've got a big smile on your face.
I can try. As I mentioned, I think that narratives, the stories are part of our operating system of our brain. I think that, this is how we see the world and how we see ourselves through those stories. We're able to provide, using technology, we're able to provide personalized intervention that not just do the triaging that Ingrid mentioned before, that try to figure out what type of treatment they need, but also offer them help at home without office hours, without judgment, without someone that inject their own views, opinion, bad days, or fight with their partners into their treatment. And I think that the beautiful thing about working with AI for treatment, and I'm not saying it's all ideal, but the ability of using it to offer a personalized intervention, AI mirrors people, right? That's why it cheats, but it's also why it's really a great platform to show them self-love. And when you use AI for self-help, this is really what people are experiencing. Very often when people tell me that, having conversations with our technology in our platform, they feel loved or helped or held. It's really the fact that they are feeling their own love that they're bringing to this to this experience. And I think with people with disabilities, especially with neurodivergence, they're very attuned to energy and to someone else's in front of them, to their true feelings and emotions, right? When you take away that experience, instead of talking to a person that might be biased, this provides them a really great way to support themselves. And to do that at scale. And at the very least, it shows them enough, it gives them enough hope that they can seek help outside of this digital space.
That's great. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Tanya.
So I've worked with neurodivergent autism. I've worked with many different things. There's actually like, if you ever heard of like sand tray therapy, you can do EMDR through sand tray therapy with that population. It's very fitting, especially the younger population. Another thing is just being heard. Like bullying is prevalent even in individuals outside of that population, even individuals outside of disabilities. So it's like, it's gotten really bad. I don't think I go a week without hearing a story of bullying. That I think is a systematic problem for the education system at one. That's again, going back to all the things that need to be changed in the systems, right? So that's another thing to add to the list. But comforting and social aspects, because with this population, they struggle with social situations. They struggle with communicating with others. They struggle with talking to others. Like there's that social anxiety that comes. And again, I'm going to say EMDR again, because it just eliminates that. And it does help that population as well. Even if they're not as verbal, it really would depend on their verbal capabilities. I know that there are high functionings and there are also very low functioning. Now, I would not recommend EMDR for a very low functioning that can't respond to you, but that could be something as simple as eye contact, making sure you're paying attention to them, giving them comfort and things, letting them be heard in any way they can communicate.
Okay, great. So next question, is there a way to provide EMDR training to those community leaders or the women hosting those community gatherings or any other kind of trauma-informed training?
I think there would be, absolutely. Where there's a will, there's a way, right? So in those communities, I think the only limitation that there would be is as long as there's clinicians. I think every country might have their own rules of order too, of who can provide services versus who cannot provide services ethically, if that makes sense. I think that as long as there are individuals in those groups that have some type of license to provide care. I know they provide training for doctors, even in EMDR, psychologists, counselors. So students that are learning the counseling techniques and things of that nature, going to school for that. So there are different avenues you can kind of go about for that training. It would be just kind of ensuring that it fits within a line of practice for every country and culture, if that makes sense. I don't want to eliminate that piece.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Any comments on that one? So the next question is, how can we encourage people to seek help and support for PTSD? Very often people are discouraged, give up, or they're too afraid to try, or may have such a high depression level that they do not have the energy or the will to try. At worst, this can lead to high risk of suicide. Any comments?
On our system, we see how people change during those. We have a 6 to 12 weeks protocol. And very often those same people that are severely traumatized and are really stuck in their past, their what if questions are similar. They start with something similar that I had for 20 years. Like, what if I didn't serve the army? What if I didn't spend a year in a hospital bed? And we see that through these sessions, their questions change and they start asking questions about their future and they find hope. And when they find hope, they start seeking their best version and they start believing that things could be good, and they should go out and do something about their emotions, their feelings, and so on. I think this combination of giving people hope, whatever through whatever therapy that you can provide them, right? I'm a big believer in AI because I love the scalability aspect. I love that you don't need to train specific people about the specific, technique or way. You don't need specialized hardware. You make it very accessible by providing something that anyone can use, anyone with a phone or computer. Well, I admit it's still a threshold, right? At some point, in some places in the world, to have internet connection and devices. But if you can provide a way to give people hope, to show them that they can heal and they can get better, I think this way would see a lot more people seeking help.
Great. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Mira.
I think another important point is to normalize mental health issues. Because in most cultures, mental health issues or those suffering from mental health issues are stigmatized. So there is a fear of being stigmatized, fear of being ridiculed, fear of being sidelined, which is what creates this inability and the incapacity to reach out for help. So if we normalize that conversation, that mental health issue is just like another physical health issue.
Yeah.
It's just another, it's an illness which can be treated. And if somebody has diabetes, we don't stigmatize that person. But somebody has a mental health issue, immediately they're ridiculed or stigmatized. So normalize the issue and create a narrative where people can recognize, understand, acknowledge, accept, and address the issue. I think that is most important. And for that, what is needed is to create that awareness and start from the schools itself. That you create that, just as we understand now, for example, obesity. There is an entire conversation. There's a narrative which is around that. So when you normalize the issue, then the capacity to reach out for help will be much higher.
Thank you so much for that. Go ahead, Ingrid.
I just want to make a quick comment on that. I totally agree with you there, Mira, and with what Emma was saying, and everybody's stating great feedback. I think one of the problems for the PTSD, whoever has got it, whichever part of the population is, as far as women and girls are concerned, you're already stigmatized in many cultures because you are a woman and because you are a girl. And now if you've got a mental health condition that we're saying we've caused it, the men have caused it by how we're treating you, no way. I think what's required here, and I think AI can help with that, and we need to look at those platforms that young boys are being nurtured on in the way. And the reason why I showed that video of negative and positive, better to find out something wrong with a small chess game. And I'm sure it probably will happen in finance or in some other area. There is going to be a throwback against AI at some point because something will happen. But we need to take, like you're doing, Omar, take charge of the conversation. And Mira, you would know how to do that in your part of the world. But we have to recognize we as women are already on the back foot before we even start. And that is a challenge because that is getting worse. And we need to come together. And when I said, why is it that misogyny is being mainstream and what can we do about it? People like Kim and Omar and all of you in all the environments that you work, we are doing something about it. And we need to coordinate on a greater scale and use new technologies that are just reframing what we already have. Because we haven't really changed. Something has changed in the influence that something very negative has taken hold of. So I think we have to bear in mind that we're already on the back foot.
Thank you.
Go ahead. You know how I said that, and a lot of people actually said that trauma is contagious, right?
Yes, absolutely.
It's contagious because being exposed to traumatic narrative on a high frequency, it gets us. That's what gets us affected. That's what starts, giving us or infecting us with that symptoms of trauma. But I think the healing also, it can be reversed by actually exposing you to positive narratives in the same amount of frequency, right? So when we coordinate our work together and we show people that there is a path for healing, whether it's AI or EMDR or CBT or whatever works, right? We all love different art. We all affected by different types of techniques. Whatever works for us, whatever is more accessible for us, whatever is more simple for us to understand, to use, whatever we connect more. I think that creating a positive narrative that would make it just viable for us to seek treatment. That's what we need to do.
Well, thank you, everyone, so much. That was amazing. I love the questions. I love the answers. I'm sure our audience really, really appreciated having some of those questions answered. In the forefront of our mind is our time. So we are closing near 12:30. So I just want to take a moment to say thank you to each one of you for your involvement and your activities and your support of Montage Initiative and PTSD and specifically. You're all doing just amazing work, and I'm just proud and honored that you guys came on today to join us in this very, very important conversation. And I hope that we can all continue to bring this conversation forward. Unfortunately, Ambassador Garcia did have to sign off because he had another meeting to go to. So I'll say goodbye to him virtually. But I do want to say one last thing. The technicians and the organization behind this that made all of this possible is Music Arta Media. And Oliver and Joe Lee have been amazing. Joe Lee has actually been behind each one of us since well before we started this conversation. And so we just really appreciate them. They're an amazing group, and keep them in mind as well. So as you guys move forward. So thank you. This is a wrap, and enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you again so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.